the Jack Chat Show. I'm interviewing Val Mustaine, a friend of mine who has taught philosophy at the community college level. And Val is going to tell us a little bit about what I know very little about, and that's a fellow called Plato, a Greek back in antiquity, who had ideas about the soul. Okay, Val, over to you. Educate myself as simply as you can and our audience as well, please, about Plato.
Plato's understanding of the soul and death are very interesting. We think that many of his ideas came out of the Middle East. He certainly traveled into India and that area. So some of these ideas probably came out of that part of the world, but where it entered into his philosophy is the idea that the soul and the body are two separate entities that join at birth and separate again at death. And when the soul separates from the body, and really, I think you would think of it as your consciousness or your awareness that's separating from the body, that happens at death. And then at death, the soul actually enters into, ultimately, the world of ideals, the things that are perfect. And it has an opportunity to experience that. But the soul then, with that, goes back down into the world and reincarnates in another body, and then lives another life. The whole idea is that each life you live, hopefully, a little better than the last life, with the idea of becoming essentially as perfect a person as you can be.
Okay, how interesting. Well, do you? Just for myself, is there, as far as you are concerned, as far as Plato is concerned, is there a difference between the soul and the spirit?
I don't think that he would make that distinction, no. Because the soul really would be the spiritual part of the being. It's that which, as I say, is associated with consciousness. You know, if one were to talk about exteriorization, it's that part of you that would exteriorize. So it's not separate from spirit.
No.
Really, it's really what you're dealing with in terms of ancient philosophy is whether or not the soul is immanent in the physical body, manifests at the same time as and only in a physical body, or whether it's manifest separate from and therefore can operate separate from the body by reincarnating.
Okay, well, here's something I turned up last night on Wikipedia that I don't want to throw, but it really did interest me, that Plato, who was drawing on Socrates, considered the psyche as the essence of the person. Could you comment on that?
Well, ultimately, you know, again, psyche, if you get into very fine details, is psyche exactly the same as soul or spirit, etc. But yeah, the essence of who the human being is obviously is going to be his consciousness. Whether you define that as psyche, which actually soul is just another word for psyche. I mean,
yeah,
soul,
that's what I was hoping you'd say.
And so really what you're dealing with is essentially the same thing. But it is, well, it's very easy just to get into the linguistics of it and not really deal with what the experience is. And the experience, I think, for Plato was one that the psyche, the soul, whatever you want to call it, is separable from and does, in fact, separate from the body at death. And in a sense, there's a soul transmigration, and it comes back and chooses another body, however it does that, and reincarnates.
Yeah. It's on that latter point that I'm not too certain what happens with reincarnation, but I really, why I threw these three concepts at you was because I'm confused, and I think a lot of of our listeners are confused about the psyche, the soul, and the spirit. For certain, in my case, when I had the near-death experience, I was in what I term spirit, but I was fully conscious and fully aware of what was happening on the other side. This is a final question, but can you comment on anything that Plato might have come up with about awareness on the other side of consciousness, in death consciousness?
I don't think he dealt with it. There's an assumption that there's some kind of awareness, but the exact nature, at least as far as I haven't read everything of Plato. I'm not going to make an universal statement about Plato, but my understanding of Plato is no, not really. But there's something, because the way he speaks about the philosopher king, who is really the person who has fully materialized his or her spiritual nature, psychic nature, whatever you want to call that. They have achieved the highest level of knowledge. They are aware of truth and beauty and knowledge. They have emerged from the cave of darkness that we live in life, and they're aware. And in that awareness, though, after death, they make a conscious choice, even though they don't need to return into life, because there's nothing that life can give them. They return into life, they reincarnate again because of an obligation to help their fellow spirits really achieve this higher awareness of spirit, to become one with truth, beauty, and knowledge. So there's a real, in a sense, it's similar to a bodhisattva viewpoint, that even though you have achieved enlightenment yourself, in that state of enlightenment, you would understand that you have an obligation to other humans, at least, if not the universe as a whole, to come back and attempt to bring all of it back up to a level of highest consciousness.
Well, thank you so much, Val. That's this should be broadcast very shortly. I'd like to ask you back. The pilot one is the eight shows of the Jack Chat show, and pilot 2 will be coming up in the fall. And I'd love to ask you back to develop a little bit more about the spirit, the soul, and the psyche. So thank you very much, Val Mustaine. We'll chat to you again. Many thanks.
Thank you, Jack. I'd love to come back because I have lots of other things to say.
Thanks, Val.
Okay.